Another big piece, I would say, to think about from the youth's perspective is kind of what's the perspective of the youth, so versus the parents. So with the parents, you can imagine they're coming to Canada, they're trying to learn English, they're trying to find housing, they're trying to find employment that fits their skill set, is personally gratifying, but also can support their family. There's common cases where a lot of professionals come to Canada and their credentials aren't recognized, and maybe they're working menial jobs, maybe they're working in the evening, maybe they're working overnight. They may not be physically present to supervise their children. A big struggle that I've seen in East African communities is that the concept of drugs are a very foreign concept. Justice in most East African countries, there is no police. There's the military and then there's civilians. And in much of those countries, there's military service. So there isn't this clear line that separates members of the military and members of the public. Everybody's technically a member of the military. So when it comes to justice, there's nobody on the corner trying to sell your kid drugs. If you're caught committing a really heinous crime, you just go straight to jail. There is no this justice system. And I've had many cousins come to Canada where concepts like cocaine, concepts like fentanyl were completely foreign. They never really were, drugs weren't really part of their lexicon until they came to Canada. Putting that into the mindset of parents where they don't really understand, or they may not be aware of all the various risks that are really out there to their youth. They may not be aware of the people that are really preying on young people, whether that's recruiting them, whether that's trying to get them involved in criminal behavior, whether that's trying to manipulate them. They're not quite thinking of it that way, and they may not see the harm in letting their kids freely roam or have limited supervision, particularly if they're not even physically present to supervise their youth. And from the perspective of the youth, if they're coming to Canada, they're really struggling with English, they're really struggling to fit in. It doesn't take much for another youth to kind of spot that kid, go up to them and say, hey, I see your clothes are a little raggedy, I see you didn't bring lunch today, let's go to McDonald's, let's go to the mall, let me buy you a new pair of shirts, let me get you shoes. And a couple weeks later, that kid made fun of your accent, we're gonna go beat him up because you're part of our family now. You shouldn't let that kid make fun of you. And a couple weeks later, hey, somebody made fun of our friend for their accent, now it's your turn to beat him up. And it just trickles from there. And it's just such a common story that we see with a lot of the youth we work with. And it can lead to criminal activity. And it's really a lot of these youth, oftentimes that we work with, they see their parents struggling, they see their peers struggling, they don't want to ask their parents for money. They're in a culture that says a young man, a teenage boy should be a man, should be providing for themselves, should be independent. And here's another person coming in saying, you can make money working minimum wage at McDonald's and get your pennies here and there, or you can come do this with me and I'll get you a couple $1,000s in a month with limited work. And for a young person who doesn't really see a future for themselves in Canada, if they're really struggling academically, they're really struggling socially, it's just the easy path, and you can't really fault a teenager for taking the path that seems the smartest way out. And you don't really have a sense of risk at that age either. Another challenge we see with a lot of young people we're working with, and this is kind of regardless of ethnicity, is that when they go to places like the Young Offender Center, the local juvie here in Calgary, it's very regimented. Wake up at a time, you shower at a time, you go to school at a time, you have your recess, you have your break time, you have your recreation time. Because it's so regimented, some of these youth that are coming from spaces where they were in refugee camps, they're in migration patterns, now they're here, they're having limited supervision, they're finally in a space that's highly, highly structured, and some of them really do well in that structured environment, to the point where going to jail or going to juvie is no longer a deterrent. They're no longer scared of it. And that's essentially the greatest punishment society has. So that's also can be a red flag for us, where if we see a kid coming out of juvie and they're not really concerned about it, we're raising those red flags. What does that mean for that youth? What does it mean for the justice system? What does it mean for really setting like effective ways of deterring youth from engaging in criminal behavior?